Well, I'm really pleased to have Nick Desai for today's podcast. Nick and I go back quite a few years, back when we were starting a snack company out of Pacoima, California. He's since gone on to develop some fantastic products and is currently the founder and CEO of PeaTos. And Nick, I just first want to say thank you so much for agreeing to this interview. You've got just a tremendous history and number of accomplishments, and I hope to dig into a few of those today. So thank you.
No, thank you, Carlos. It's been a pleasure, getting to know you over the years. And yes, we do have a long history, and you've been both instrumental and you've been both a mentor and a friend, and instrumental in the accomplishments we made to date. Thank you for serving on our early board and for believing in the company all these years.
Well, thank you for those kind words, Nick. So I thought we'd just start. There's a lot I want to cover, but let's just start with just a little bit of background for the audience. Just a little bit about your story, how you got to where you are, and what in the world motivated you to start snack companies.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I've always found that with the entrepreneur journey, it's not like it's not like a set clear path that you kind of map out from day one and then follow. You kind of have to be willing to have this overall North Star that guides you in a certain direction, but then also kind of course correct along the way. And so, our journey is very similar in that it wasn't like I woke up one day and said, "Oh, let's challenge the world's biggest snack company by creating, analogs of their products and marketing them directly against them." But I did have, a unique kind of history and background that I think led to this. I think it's a typical entrepreneur story that's a combination of kind of personal passion, personal background and experiences, and then also business, acumen, and then mentors like you along the way that kind of came together into what's led to what we're doing today. So just a little bit about that background. I started my career in investment banking, where I was working with small entrepreneurs, helping them raise capital and do mergers and acquisitions. So it was a great prelude to kind of having my own company, in the sense that I got to watch these entrepreneurs, building their companies and helping them with the critical part of it, which was the capital, which is always a very important element of any company of any size. But going back a little bit before that, to my childhood, I was born and brought up in the United States, but of Indian immigrants, Indian parents who came from India. So I had the kind of unique opportunity to experience both cultures, and of course both food styles along the way. And I was personally what I call an avid kind of salty, crunchy, fried stuff consumer. There's certain kind of universal, I think, likes that if you go around the world, you'll see that there's many different kinds of food products. But if you go back into even like there's a great book that I'm sure you're familiar with, Carlos, called Salt, Sugar, Fat, by this Harvard professor, and it talks about like how we're genetically hardwired to want those ingredient classes. And if you look at the foods around the world, they may be very different, but they also have certain similarities. Everyone around the world likes salt in some form of their diet. Everyone likes, fat. Everyone likes fried stuff, right? These are almost universal truths. And so, when I look at a product like Cheetos or Doritos, which I used to love growing up, they're serving up that kind of need for that salty, crunchy experience, fatty experience. And so, when I was traveling to India, I was exposed to the Indian world of what I call salty, crunchy, fried snacks. And they're very prolific there also. But the one big difference that I noticed that was kind of intriguing to me was that over here in the U.S., the most common base used in these products, and you'll be you're very familiar with this, is corn and or potatoes, right? Those are two very important ingredients that are used as kind of the starting point of most of these brands: Cheetos, Doritos, Funyuns, Fritos. In India, the most common base used is actually legumes. Legumes are, and then rice flour is also used a lot, but it's a little bit different than what's used here. And it's not because they're trying to make a healthier snack; it's because it's part of the local diet. And in India, plant-based protein via legumes has always been a really important part of the diet. And so, when I realized that the experience that's called satisfaction, right, of that craving for that salty, crunchy, fatty experience was being met by both these different types of snacks, it occurred to me that, and then fast forward to, I was in investment banking, and then ultimately in 2008, the markets shifted, and I moved out of banking and wanted to own my own company. And so I bought a couple of companies in the software and technology space, and we were focusing on smaller companies and turning them around. And then one day in 2011, I came across a snack food company, and it was in the nuts and trail mix space. And it was called Energy Club, and that was, as you recall, Carlos, when you first got involved. And I decided to acquire it because I always had a passion around the food space, and I saw so many trends going on with like people wanting to have, eat better and eat healthier, and people supporting smaller brands, and kind of like, really going after there's a bigger interest developing in the emerging brands, as opposed to the big behemoths. And so I thought it was an interesting time to be in the food business, and I acquired this company, frankly, very naively, thinking that I could quickly pivot it and within months or a couple of years change it into this other thing that I wanted, this vision that I had. That thing that I thought would take me, 6 months to 2 years took me 8 years to do. And I think you've been through a lot of the journey and the struggles along the way, and there's been many points at which I didn't think we were going to make it. Many points at which I had sleepless nights and lots of frustration, but that's all the stuff that builds a character along the way, right? So ultimately, that snack food company, we ended up, it was in the nut and trail mix segment. We ended up securing a license to the Sunkist brand. We built that business up. We actually got out of the manufacturing side of the business, and focused on the brand side, and then ultimately sold that business in 2018, after we had launched the products in Walmart and Kroger and H-E-B and Publix and a variety of other major retailers. But that's when I got to know, because we were marketing these products in the produce section of the stores, and they were like nuts and trail mix and dried fruit type products, and freeze dried fruit products. And that's when I got to know the produce department really well, because Sunkist is such a big, such a big produce oriented brand. But this vision, this dream that I had all along in my back of my mind was this notion of, again, these Indian snacks that I'd experienced as a child, and how as this market in the US is evolving towards a desire for healthier products, more nutrient dense products, the higher protein content, higher fiber content, and all of those things, it occurred to me that there's a big opportunity to create food products using more of the legume base. And because we were in the snacking world, that was a natural place to start. And so originally the concept was actually, let's import these products from India and market them in the United States. And I saw a lot of these small companies that were starting to do that, brands like Vienna and Good Bean and Saffron Road and others, where they're taking like, legumes and flavoring them and serving them up as a snack. But one thing that was bothering me was I because I was an investment banker, I'm very, I'm numbers oriented, and it was bothering me when I looked at, like, you pick up the papers or the trade magazines, and you see how it talks about how everyone in America is now eating healthy, and we all want, kale chips and quinoa puffs, and no one wants junk food, right? But then you look at the numbers and wait a minute, Cheetos did $1.7 billion last year in sales. And actually, they grew 6% from the prior year. If you take their dollar growth, it's actually more than the entire category of kale chips. Their 1 year dollar growth exceeds the entire category of kale chips. So I'm like, wait a minute, Americans are still eating a lot of Cheetos.
Yeah. It's always learn what's in the pantry does not line up with what people say.
Exactly right. So I was like, and then I looked at the sales of these smaller brands that were doing these I'll call it the Indian style, snacks, and they were very small, sub $10 million, and so I'm like, how do you kind of bridge that gap? Like, it doesn't seem like what people are saying is matching what they're doing. And my whole thesis there was that a couple of things I learned along the way with the Sunkist brand and with the the nuts business, and just kind of being in the CPG business in general, is a couple of things. One is that people don't want to, there's always, I call it, in almost every decision, there's that devil on your shoulder and the angel on your shoulder, right? And it's like your taste buds are the devil in the sense that they always drive you in the wrong direction. and your brain, is the angel, which is trying to convince you to do the right thing, right? But usually, unfortunately, the devil wins, and at least in the foods category. People, are genetically hardwired to want a certain taste experience, and I don't think we want to give that up. And so that's one of the key things, I think, that when you ask people to make a sacrifice for the sake of health, typically that is going to be a losing proposition in the long run, and you're not going to get what I call the mass adoption. And then the second thing is, the less you ask people to change what they already used to, their normal habits, their normal routines, the better off you probably are, because it takes a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of change, to get people to do new things. And I think it's interesting because we saw during this pandemic, a lot of what would normally change that would normally have taken decades occurred in a very short span of time. But unless you get some kind of, like, what I call external, event, and that with the pandemic we obviously had that. It's a very time consuming, slow process, an expensive process to change behavior, consumption behavioral patterns. I think you'll agree. So we then morphed the idea, and actually with some of the early conversations I had with you also, that then led to this new concept, which was, wait a minute, instead of bringing over these forms and flavors and products that people aren't accustomed to or used to, why don't we take the flavors and forms that America already loves, but just re-engineer them from a more nutrient-dense base? Because the insight we're acting on is that, Cheetos, for example, high level, they're 65% corn, 25% oil, and 10% seasoning. Those are rough numbers, of course, but you get the point. That the 65% of the Cheeto that's corn is not the reason a consumer is buying it. They're not going into the store and saying, I want a corn-based Cheeto. They're right. saying, I want a cheesy, crunchy experience. And so we said to ourselves, what if we replace that corn base with a more nutrient-dense legume base, as is being done in other parts of the world with these other snacks, but create literally a pea-based Cheeto. And the reason I call it a Cheeto, by the way, because you're probably curious, like, why does Nick keep using the brand name to describe the product? It's because Frito-Lay's market share in these categories is so immense that I've never seen anything like it. You can basically call it a monopoly. I mean, most Americans will be, if you put an orange crunchy thing on their desk, they're going to say, who brought the Cheetos? They're not going to say, who brought the cheese puff.
Sure. Right. It's like Kleenex. It's just become ubiquitous.
Exactly.
The product.
Exactly.
So let me just, Nick, that's what a tremendous journey. And I think it's been more than 8 years. But one thing that's, really impressed me is, well, first of all, you pivoted from software to food, which, is already a big leap. But then along the way, you went from a trail mix company to a branded Sunkist trail mix, to a few other things in between, and landed on PeaTos, which has gained a lot of success in recent years. But the fact that you were able to pivot, from the outside, it seems effortless, but obviously it wasn't. And just want to get some of your insights and thoughts on how were you able to do that, and frankly, not just give up. Because there must have been some tough things, and I think this is also really helpful for other prospective entrepreneurs to understand that, if you don't pivot and are successful, you're really the unusual. Maybe you don't even exist. And my guess is most entrepreneurs like yourself have to go through quite a bit of pivoting. You perhaps more than most, but just love to hear your thoughts on that, and what drove you and kept your eye on the prize to finally get where you got. And I do remember, by the way, when I first met you, you did talk about, wow, how come we don't have Indian snacks in the US? And having spent a lot of time in India myself, I totally agreed and didn't have a good answer. So it sounds like you finally came up with the answer. But I want to understand the pivoting piece and advice and how you thought about that.
Yeah, the pivoting piece, I think it's probably central to an entrepreneur's kind of composition, in the sense that I think you have to remember, like, first of all, I encourage my team and my staff always to think about this, is don't just think about what you're doing, think about why you're doing it. And always keep that in the back of your mind, which is, but first of all, when you're building a company, I think it's important to remember that ultimately a company is a financial instrument. It is something that you have investors, and for certainly I did. Now there are people out there who are like, you know what, my grandmother used to make these cookies, and every time I make these cookies, I remember my grandmother, so I love making them. and then, you know, people like them, so maybe they start selling them locally. And for them, maybe it's a side hobby. They could be a part-time mom, they could be, you know, right, and that's their job. Their goal in life is just to is different. It's not like I want to make this into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. It's, hey, I just want to, you know, experience my grandmother's memory. If that's the reason you're doing it, then that's a great reason, and it's a noble reason, and continue doing it in that way. But that wasn't the reason I was doing it. I was doing it because I did want to build a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. And so I always kept my goal in mind, and also the investors who were backing me, you know, we're doing it with the same purpose, which is they want this to be financially lucrative. So in doing that, I always think to myself, you have to blend art and commerce in a sense. For the most successful, I think, ideas are the ones that blend the two together, because art is like creativity, right? It's passion. It's that kind of soft element. But commerce is a little bit more defined. It's logical, it's analytical. So it's the right brain, the left brain working together when you get the art and commerce going. And if you look at like the most successful, you know, in any industry, the most successful movie producers or the most successful whatever, it's always the ones that are able to cross that. Like Steven Spielberg was always one of my favorite you know, director producers. And when he made movies like E.T. or Jurassic Park, it was really creative and new and groundbreaking, but also very commercial and broad, right? In that sense. And that's when I think you get really big success, is when you're able to blend that art and the commerce together. And too often I see companies that have just commerce and they don't have any heart or creativity, or I see the opposite, where it's very niche and it's very just artistic, but they don't have the commerce element well thought out. And so the pivoting for me, it was always keeping those two things combined, and saying to myself, when you're small, you have to basically go a little bit with what I call the low hanging fruit. You have to, you know, like, why did we choose this path of doing the Cheeto style pea-based snack instead of bringing over the Indian snacks? Because my original idea was the Indian snacks. So why did we change? Well, we changed because it would have been a lot harder, a lot more expensive, and taken a lot longer to build a brand that consumers didn't understand, versus one where you're saying, hey, this is a pea-based Cheeto, which they understand very easily, you know. So that was
different but familiar at the same time, so made the option a lot easier. So, by the way, the analogy to Hollywood is very appropriate, considering that you're based in Los Angeles. So, hey, a couple of things. You mentioned your investors, and by the way, one thing I've been so impressed with you is your commitment to investors, and you know that you really are sincere about wanting to make sure that you're really returning, making a return for their investment. But that leads me to the question, and I think also other startups and entrepreneurs would love your thoughts on this. What were your thoughts when you started and you got investors as well as advisors? What were you looking for? How much choice did you have? Was it more like, okay, this guy's willing to give me money, I'll take it? I mean, how did that process work? Sort of the to and fro of finding investors, but also finding investors and advisors that you felt would add value, not just dollars.
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, early on, you know, you're not going to get anyone to give you, you know, $50 million for your brand new baby, right? So you have to be practical about, like, how much can I get, and you got to get going. Like, there's an old saying, like for people who are successful, I think that the one common trait is like, it can be very daunting of like, where do I start, right? And what do I do next? And I always say, just start. Like you're not going to start in the right place. It's probably going to be the wrong place, but just get started, because you'll figure it out along the way, you know. And that's the key, I think, with all entrepreneurs that experience success, is that they didn't wait to figure out the exact answer before they got started. They just jumped in and started it, you know. Right. And so for me, it was like, you know, I bought that initial company, right? That was the nut and trail mix company. I knew nothing about the food space, so I was thinking to myself, look, I need at that time, by the way, I needed $3 million to buy it, which, by the way, turned out to be woefully inadequate. I'll just tell you, I actually should have raised 10 million. But anyway, the 3 million in itself were what seemed like a lot at the time. And so I wanted to find people who, I'm like, you know what, I need two things in life. I think the key elements of success come from capital, right? Money, and then you need know-how, knowledge, experience, all of those things, right? And so I needed both of those. But in some ways, money can buy experience, meaning if I have money, I can go get executives, I can go get talented people who know how to do things, right? But at the same time, sometimes I feel like when you're paying someone to do something, you're not, you know, they're motivated to give you an answer you want to hear. And it's extremely important, I think, in entrepreneurialism to always be second guessing yourself and everything around you. You got to always be searching for what I call the true truth. You know, the true truth is in the hands of the consumer, by the way.
That
Right?
can't always be easy, though. I mean, when you're, you know, when you're on the one hand passionate about something, at the same time being willing to listen perhaps to what you don't want to hear.
It's not easy at all, but I think you have to be able to do that in order to, if your goal, and again, depends what your goal is, right? If I go back to the goal, my goal is just, I want to make this cookie my way, then make the cookie your way, but realize that you may not hit a lot of financial success. If your goal is, I want to also be very financially successful, there's no way to be financially successful if you're not willing to listen very, you know, critically to what you're doing and adjust it as you need to, because you're not doing it for yourself. If you're doing it for yourself, you'll stay small. You're doing it for the consumer. You're doing it for someone who wants this. And ideally, you want a lot of people to want it, because if it's going to be a big idea, you need a lot of people to want it. You know, it can't just be a few people here or there. It has to be a lot of people. And so I think that's what's key. But when in doing so and wanting that true answer, I kind of decided to do something a little bit novel that worked out really well, frankly, which is I said, let me go for, because the other thing is a lot of people get money from friends or family members. But again, that's to me, that's difficult, because, you know, I hate involving friends and family, by the way, in business enterprises. I like keeping the two separate. And again, friends and family often have a hard time telling you the true truth. So I said, I need objective investors, but I need those that are going to be, you know, not like what I call institutions that are going to have a formal process. So I'm looking for individuals who've been successful. And ideally, I want individuals who know a lot about the food space. So that's why I started asking, you know, one person after the other. That's how I met you, Carlos. Right? I got introduced to you through someone else who introduced me through someone else. And I literally just started meeting him. I remember you and I had a dinner. I think
It's like old-fashioned networking, Nick.
Yeah, you and I had dinner, I think, at PF Chang's that one night. And I talked to you in the idea, and you invested, not like, not your entire wealth, but you invested a decent amount of money in my idea. What I loved about that was that I was getting both the money that I needed to raise for the company, but also money from people who had great knowledge, who were going to be motivated to help me. So I always tell people, by the way, and you're one of the examples I use, I say, Carlos invested X dollars in the company, but the amount of value I've gotten from Carlos is 10X. And the other 9X has come from his experience and knowledge, which he's given me. Yeah, he's given me for free, because he'd already invested that 1X and he wanted that 1X to succeed. So it was kind of my way of getting, experts like yourself really excited and motivated about helping me with the vision. And I feel like if you get a lot of smart people rowing in the same direction, you're going to find success.
No, that makes a lot of sense, Nick. And again, thanks for the kind words. One thing I want to, just switching gears a little bit, you hear about guerrilla marketing. It's a very popular, maybe almost a throwaway phase these days, but everybody says you got to do guerrilla marketing. Now, I understand you didn't have a multi-million-dollar advertising budget. You never did, but you were able to get just tremendous publicity and press for PeaTos. And of course, this story wouldn't be complete without you telling us from your perspective, the whole front of the Wall Street Journal story. A lot of the audience may not be aware of this, but I think it would love to hear your thoughts on how you were able to leverage social media, call it guerrilla marketing if you want, and get the word out, because here you got this great idea, PeaTos. It's a nutrient dense version of Cheetos. So it looks familiar, but your brain will be happy too, because it's saying, oh, this is good. It's got some protein. But if you don't know about it, it doesn't matter, right? So
exactly.
You do have to build awareness. I think we all understand that. And I think you've really been brilliant at building awareness from a very scrappy level. So just like to hear your thoughts on that. And also give us a little bit behind the scenes of the whole Wall Street story, which got you tremendous publicity.
Yeah, so that's interesting you say that. I started my career, remember we talked about, you said it's appropriate to bring up Hollywood because we're based in LA. It actually goes a step beyond that. I started my career in the entertainment business.
Oh, okay.
I was a lawyer for the MGM studios. That was my first job out of law school. But after that, I actually was representing writers and directors for a little while. So I was representing storytellers, and that I actually look at as one of the best experiences that I ever picked up, because I've always realized along the way in investment banking, this is what helped me a ton, is that everyone has the numbers, right? The numbers are the same, and if everything in life is based on numbers, you're going to come to the same answer, because math is math. 4 + 3 always equals 7, but the story is what makes two people different. And that's ultimately when we value things differently that have the same numbers, it's because of that other element. Why is it that Tesla today is worth more than the combined value of all the other traditional car companies combined, even though their sales are much lower? Their numbers are far worse. Sure. Why is it that some of these companies get out there and get these massive valuations on Wall Street? It's because they have that story element, right? And so I think storytelling is such an important part of any kind of brand building and any kind of guerrilla marketing tactics. And you must have something that's interesting. And I always like to say that a good story, if you look at all the major Hollywood blockbusters, the one common theme you'll find is that they obviously all had a great hero, and we're all big, we all love to kind of root after the hero, right? But what makes the hero relevant is the villain. If you don't have a strong villain, you don't have a reason to have the hero exist. And if you look at all like Star Wars and all these super successful hit blockbusters, they had the very powerful villain. Remember Darth Vader? Like, this is a villain you love to hate,
Yeah,
right? Yeah. And so we have, for us, it was like, and we kind of enjoy villainizing them a little bit, and they deserve it because they've created such a monopoly for themselves. But we had Frito-Lay. We had this beautiful villain, who basically is like the big bad wolf of the snacking industry. They've controlled the snack market to the detriment of us little guys. So it was a perfect villain to go after, and we did. And so using them as,
I think it was more David and Goliath than Star Wars, but go on.
Yeah, exactly. It definitely was. So anyway, so that's kind of like how I think that for us at least, we've gotten a lot of publicity and kind of interest, is because we're taking on that 8,000-pound gorilla so directly. And I think and then of course they actually helped us out a little bit, probably unknowingly, when they came after us on the trademark matter, which is what led to the Wall Street story. Because early on we were almost jokingly using this tagline, and it was called, when we first launched the product, they obviously, Cheetos has this great mascot that's very well known, Chester, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a cheetah. And so we then said to ourselves, wait a minute, if they have a cheetah, we need something even more powerful, So we said our mascot's going to be a tiger, a tiger and then one of our young marketing executives one day, and again, we did a lot of this stuff, was not like, it wasn't like we spent $500,000 in some marketing study to figure this out. I mean, this was just like all of us kind of shooting the
like some spitballing.
Yeah, spitballing it while we're trying to figure out how to make this great product. And so one of my young marketing cohorts figured out that tigers in the wild have a lifespan of 17 years, while cheetahs in the wild only have a lifespan of 12 years. So we figured out that tigers actually live longer than cheetahs, and we use this as our early slogan. We said tigers live longer than cheetahs, and we had a picture of a tiger on our pack. And then that wasn't even what caused it. Then we went out and went to the USPTO, the trademark office, and tried to trademark that term. And that's when Frito-Lay got a little peeved, and they basically sent us a letter that said, they contest this trademark. And so it wasn't even that they were really trying to sue the company, but they were trying to, basically block our trademark. Right. And then they sent us a cease and desist, which is common practice in the industry. But then, instead of backing
I got to believe being a lawyer was a big advantage, because you kind of knew the game.
It was a huge lawyer. And remember, when I started my career in MGM, I was a trademark lawyer, so that definitely helped. But that definitely ruffled some feathers. My board was concerned. Investors were concerned, obviously, right? I mean, you have this big, massive giant who can tie you up in litigation for years. But in a way, these kind of things sometimes nowadays backfire on the big company, because it no longer is it that they can use their kind of legal clout, because there's what's happened now is that there's the news and the access to information occurs at a lightning speed. And so we all have, I always say, like, these brands, when I talk to them, they're always like, oh, I wish I could get into Kroger, I wish I could get into Walmart, I wish I could get into Publix, right? These retailers, right? that control the distribution. But I would say, guys, you feel like the retailer is your boss, right, so to speak. But guess who the retailer's boss is? The retailer's boss is the consumer.
Absolutely. They ask for it, the retailer will provide it. Yes.
Exactly. Frito-Lay's boss is the consumer also. We all are very scared of the consumer. And look at what's happening right now, like in the world, and because of social media and Facebook and all these things. Look at how companies that would never even make a political statement are getting involved in making statements, political statements, because they realize that if they don't, the consumer is going to get upset.
The court of public opinion will try them.
Exactly. And I'm not saying, by the way, that that's right or good or bad. I'm not going to comment on that.
But it's reality. Yeah.
I'm just saying it's reality. Exactly. It's just reality. And so there's been many stories. In fact, the Just Mayo story was one that we were intrigued by, where remember Unilever tried to sue Just Mayo and ultimately had to back off, not because they were wrong legally, but because the consumer got very upset.
Yeah.
You know? I think
I get all that, but I want to hear how you got to the front page of the Wall Street Journal.
You have to be a bit of a ham, a self-promoter in order to succeed in a young brand. So we obviously had a great story, and then we just went out and started knocking on doors, to just like I did early on with the networking, and we called up every big reporter at every one of these major news outlets. At the end of the day, these reporters are looking for juicy tidbits, right? And here was a big company trying to squash the little guy who's trying to come after one of the most well-known brands in the country. And so it became, it got on the front page of the Wall Street Journal.
That's great. So they didn't discover it, you helped them discover the story.
Yeah, I think you always have to help, but you have to nudge a little bit. I never like to rely on an assumption. Even if you have something great, that's great, but you better, like I always tell people, create the story, then tell the story, through a press release, then market the press release. Like even with our PR group, I always tell them, like, sending out the press release, that's just step one, guys. Now take that story for the press release and send it to the reporters, because if you help people do their job, you'll actually help yourself do your job.
Absolutely. So did you know it was going to get published before it did, or was it a surprise?
We had no idea.
So take me through. I mean, when did you find out, and what was the sort of the mood like when you just
one day,
or did people call you and say, "Hey, Nick, look at the paper"?
We literally woke up one morning and my phone was blowing up, and I was like, "What's going on here?" And there was like text after text, and email after email pouring in. "Oh, I just saw you in the Wall Street Journal. I just saw about Wall Street Journal. Is everything okay?" And then I started getting calls from board members saying, "Hey, I heard Frito-Lay suing us. What's going on?" And then investors, and then this and that, and it was mayhem for a couple of weeks. I mean, it was scary too, by the way. Like we had no idea what was going to happen, but those are the kind of moments that actually, I think, define the character of a company, and ultimately the ones you look back on fondly and say, we got through that.
Well, it's a great story, and to your point, I really do like the point you made earlier that you've got to have this story. You can have the best product, but if nobody buys it, you're not really having much impact. And you can have a slick campaign, but of course you don't have the product behind it, then it's sort of hollow and won't sustain. So that makes a lot of sense. So you've gotten now, after a lot of trial and error and a lot of learning along the way, what's next?
Well, I mean, we're doing a few things now. One, we're continuing to build out the PeaTos brand, because it was always, the goal was always to go after the biggest forms and biggest ideas. So we launched the Cheeto style, I call it the crunchy Cheeto style snack. Then we launched the Funyun style ring. Now we're about to launch in the next few weeks, actually, one of the most exciting things of all, which is a Dorito style chip. And that will launch in a couple months here. So everyone has been very excited about that. Our e-commerce growth has been mushrooming and skyrocketing because of help by the pandemic, of course. And so there's exciting things growing for PeaTos, but there's something bigger brewing than that now. And I think as a function of some of the things the trends that we've seen because of the pandemic, we are actually embarking on something even bigger than just PeaTos. We are going to actually look to consolidate a variety of better for you snacking brands under one common platform that can be what I call the best of emerging brands culture married with the scale and discipline of big CPG. Because I see a big need for that, because it seems like big CPG has always been enamored by the growth of these emerging brands, right? And they often invest in them and buy them. But how many times do you see that story go sour? How many times do you see that, oh, this brand that so-and-so bought, and by the way, they were going to put their marketing muscle behind it, their money behind it, their good people behind it. And suddenly 3 years later, the emerging brand that they bought is dead or dying and actually being sold back to the entrepreneur who they bought it from. That's the story of Crave. It's the story of Zico Water. It's the story of countless other brands that I can mention. And I always look, huh?
Bolthouse.
Yeah, both, exactly. And I always look at like what happened, what went wrong here, because they had all the ingredients to make the cake. They had the capital, they had the people, they had the resources, the know-how, the skills, the distribution. So what went wrong? And I boiled it down to, it's the culture. The culture is so different. And that's what stifles, I think, the smaller companies. And it just, in the end, that the two cultures just never blend well together. And so I think that what we can potentially create is something but if you look at other industries, you look at tech, for example, like look at how good a job they've done, even with the larger companies. Like when you look at Amazon or Google, they've been able to maintain a much more fast-moving entrepreneurial kind of, empowerment style culture. And I think that's helped those companies. But I think some of the traditional industries, and especially food, is still very kind of old school, I like to say, in their thinking. And so I think there's a huge opportunity to bring that cultural shift. And I think we're pretty excited about doing something like that. So we've been talking to a few other brands that are exciting, just like PeaTos, about joining forces and consolidating to create this kind of platform.
I think that's a really exciting idea, Nick. And I know we've talked about it briefly in the past, and it's true. I mean, the big companies, and I've been on both sides, as you know. We see these smaller brands capturing a hugely disproportionate amount of the growth, if not all of it. And yes, the large CPG companies are investing, trying to bring them along. But as you say, the story just seems to be so predictable. There may be some exceptions, but the rule seems to be that one way or another, they just they either overpay or they just don't see the success that the let's call it the unencumbered or uncommitted brands can succeed. And you talked about the culture, and that certainly seems to be a big part of it. Is this something that big companies can ever learn to?
It's just a very different setup, a different style. And it's like almost like that old saying, like in a way opposites attract, but then you have to be willing to live with that person. You've been married a long time, I've been married a long time. It's like sometimes those initial things that attract you because they're different are the same things that annoy you later, Mm-hmm. and so in companies, I think it's the same way, where both sides seem to be enamored by the other. Like emerging brands are like, oh, they have all this resources, capital, structure, right. And then the big guys are like, oh, they have all this innovation, creativity, blah blah blah. But then they start getting married, and then the entrepreneurs feel stifled. They're like, oh, they keep asking me for these damn reports every Tuesday, and I'm not a reports guy, and meanwhile the big company's like, he won't listen to us, he won't do what we tell him, or she, right? And he has no discipline and blah blah blah. And it's like, yes, that's what made them successful, So
you're right. It seems to be just mutually incompatible at some level, despite good intentions. And even if they love each other, you can kill somebody with kindness, I guess.
Exactly. And that's why I think that building some kind of like this platform that I'm kind of envisioning may be the ticket, maybe the tool that allows the big CPG to say, look, let me get involved with this platform as opposed to with an individual single brand, because by nurturing the platform, I can actually help, because this platform is set up for the right kind of structure and the right kind of decision-making processes to allow these entrepreneurial brands to succeed and to foster them, and instead of strangling them.
Well, you know what? This sounds like another Nick Desai pivot.
Exactly. It is.
Back to
I love the pivot moments, because it's always, it's super exciting to be working on something where you're not fully comfortable with what the outcome will be.
That's a great point. I mean, I think it's almost tried at this point to say, but many entrepreneurs that I talk to, I said, well, what if you knew then what you know now? And they say, oh my God, I never would have done it, but I'm glad I didn't know.
Exactly.
Is that true for you too?
Well, it's not only is it extremely true, but I always remember Steve Jobs' famous saying. I always, in the back of my mind, I plays like a record over and over again, which is stay hungry, stay foolish. Remember those 4 words, and I think that there was huge wisdom in those 4 words, right? Stay hungry, stay foolish. That's what makes entrepreneurs succeed. It's that initial hunger, that drive, that kind of killer instinct, but combined with a little bit of foolishness. I always say, like, if we were in Vegas, you should never bet on the entrepreneur. The odds are always against the entrepreneur, right? I mean, the Vegas odds should never be behind the entrepreneur. But that said, how is it that the entrepreneur often is able to buck those odds and succeed? I don't know. I can't give you the answer to that, but I'll tell you this: my entire life, I've somehow managed to make succeed what was deemed to be almost impossible. So I do believe in myself. I believe in my ability to do those. I don't expect other people to believe in me, but over the years, I think they do, and they have. And thanks to people like you who did believe in me, I've been able to do some of this stuff. But
well, nothing like a few wins on the board, right?
Exactly.
Well, and you certainly had a few wins, Nick. So it's an impressive story. And just love to hear, just your passion comes through loud and clear, and your creativity. I mean, it's like not enough that you made all these pivots. First of all, like I said, from entertainment to software to the food and snack world, but then even modifying that. And now you're on to sounds like another very creative and exciting idea. And I'm sure if I talk to you a few years from now and talk about how successful it's been, you'll also remember some of the times when you had your doubts and and wonder why the hell you started to begin with. But I guess that's the nature of the game, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think just I would there's only one attribute that's been linked to success, that's consistently linked to success, I should say. And it's not any of the things that we would all think. It's not, oh, they got a higher education, or they're smart, or they got a fancy degree, or they had money, or they had this, or they had that. It's none of those things. Those things can help, and they have helped at times. But the one consistent thing that's been linked to success is what they call stick-to-itiveness, grit, persistence. It means, I always look at it like, just stay in the game. A game, and like if you're a sports fan, like the team that wins, it's not that so and so team won over the other. It's so and so team won at that moment in time. And if that game had gone on for another minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes, who knows what would have happened? Another team may have won, right? The outcome could have been totally different. So if you look at these early companies like Uber and Amazon, you can argue that some of them are still trying to figure out their business model, but certainly they've changed dramatically from their original plan. So it's not like you look at these successful companies and like, oh, they had it all figured out from day one. Amazon has morphed tremendously along the way.
Google, they were a bookseller, weren't they?
Exactly, they were a used bookseller. Uber is still trying to figure out exactly how to get their business model right. So you need just stay in the game. Find a way to stay in the game, and success will follow. I know it sounds
well, no, and I think you embody that stick-to-itiveness. At the same time, I see you're able to not hang on to ideas or strategy that's not working, which I think is equally important. Well, Nick, again, it's been an absolute pleasure. Is any other, let's say, parting thoughts you want to leave with the audience, whether they're aspiring entrepreneurs or investors or just interested in the story?
No, I think that we've all gone through a very difficult period of time. The world has gone through a very difficult period of time, and we're finally starting to come out on the other side of it. And I think that that's super exciting for me. And I think that we should all really create both, opportunities and challenges. But I always like to remember as an entrepreneur that any challenge is an opportunity for another. So always remember that. It's like any challenge you encounter, twist it around into, well, what's the opportunity here? We're seeing our e-commerce sales going down now finally because now people are starting to get out again in the world. So we had an executive meeting yesterday, and we were like, oh, what's going on now? The e-commerce numbers are going down a little bit and the reason is because everyone's getting back out in the world. Okay, great. Well, that means that there's opportunity in food service because the people are out on airlines, and they're out on cruise ships, and they're out in going to 7-Eleven. So let's start focusing on that. So always look for, in a challenge, always find the opportunity. That's how I look at it.
That's great advice. And well, I look forward to finding PeaTos on my next flight when I eventually take one again.
Alaska Airlines is serving them up, so thank you.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Again, real pleasure, and thanks so much for your time, Nick. I know the audience is going to really get a lot of value out of the many points you made, in particular, just your openness and willingness to share how your journey and how you got here and what's worked, and to get a sneak preview into your next chapter, which also sounds very exciting and I'm sure will be very successful.
Thank you, Carlos. I appreciate the time you took to hear our story and the friendship that you've had with me over the years.
Of course, my pleasure, and also value that friendship. Thank you, Nick.